He was a man of numbers, silence, and secrets. Dr. Klaus Heinemann, a German engineer whose genius was said to border on the impossible. Born in 1903 near Dresden, Heinemann grew up obsessed with flight and magnetism, studying the skies the way poets study words. By the time war consumed Europe, his mind was already decades ahead. To those who knew him, Klaus was a quiet figure, polite, unassuming, yet perpetually distant. But behind that calm exterior lay designs that terrified even his peers. As the Reich's desperation grew, Heinemann was recruited into a classified program buried deep beneath the Harz Mountains, a labyrinth of tunnels carved from stone and secrecy. It was said he worked on engines that defied gravity, weapons that could bend light, machines that hummed with energy no one could explain. His official designation: Project Lichtfalke, Light Falcon. By 1944, Allied intelligence had intercepted fragments of communication mentioning Phase II successful and field test near Wernigerode. Then, nothing. In April 1945, with Allied troops closing in from the west and Soviet forces pressing from the east, the mountain facility went dark. Locals later claimed to hear explosions echoing from inside the hills at dawn. When American soldiers arrived days later, they found the entrances collapsed, tunnels sealed, and the upper levels scorched. Inside, no bodies, no papers, no machines. Only the faint odor of ozone and scorched metal. Heinemann and his entire research staff, 43 men and women, were gone. Some said they fled. Others believed they were buried alive in their own creation. But one officer, a young engineer with the U.S. 9th Armored Division, wrote something chilling in his field journal. The instruments are still warm. Decades later, survivors of the region would speak of strange lights flickering beneath the forest floor, of humming vibrations at night that made the air tremble. And though historians dismissed them as folklore, every story began the same way, with the name Klaus Heinemann, the man who vanished into the earth, taking his machines and his secrets with him. World War II wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was waged in laboratories, in the minds of men chasing miracles. The Nazis called them Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons, and believed they could reverse the inevitable tide of defeat. Jet aircraft, rocket-propelled fighters, guided bombs, even whispers of anti-gravity discs, all born from a regime that saw science as salvation. Beneath the surface of Germany, entire industries were moved underground. Mines became laboratories. Caves became factories. And somewhere in that hidden network, Dr. Klaus Heinemann built his machines. Official documents speak of Project 513, a prototype propulsion device said to produce lift without combustion. Rumors claimed it could hover silently for minutes at a time. To most, it sounded like science fiction, but the Reich took such visions seriously, too seriously. The Harz Mountains became a ghost landscape of barbed wire and armed guards. Locals were forbidden to wander near the old iron mines. Supply trains arrived at night, carrying equipment from Siemens, AEG, and Junkers under forged manifests. No one ever saw what came out. Engineers who worked near the site spoke in code. The bird sings. The light breathes. The earth hums. Then they stopped speaking altogether. Some were transferred. Others disappeared. After the war, Allied intelligence teams scoured captured archives and found hints of multiple shadow projects, each competing for Hitler's attention. Vril, Die Glock, the sun-gun weapons that promised to break the laws of nature. Among them, one codename kept reappearing: Lichtfalke. A British debriefing file from 1946 noted that the device's theoretical schematics predicted magnetic field containment not achieved until the 1980 seconds. The author underlined one sentence twice: Subject Heinemann presumed deceased. location of apparatus unknown. Yet, deep in the post-war confusion, fragments of strange alloy were catalogued by U.S. Leschen engineers, alloys that resisted conventional melting points and produced faint magnetic readings when struck. Nobody could trace their origin. To this day, the archives list them as recovered materials, source indeterminate. But to those who know the legend, they were more than fragments. They were the first proof that Klaus Heinemann's impossible machine had once existed, and perhaps still does. April 28, 1945. 3 days before Hitler's death, Berlin's airwaves were chaos. Broken messages, desperate commands, silence between bursts of static. But somewhere in that noise, Allied cryptographers intercepted a signal that didn't match any known transmission code. It came from the Harz region, the same sector where Dr. Klaus Heinemann's research facility was rumored to exist. The message was short, distorted, but chillingly clear. Phase Dreh complete. Preparing descent. Then, a final burst of static. Nothing after. No coordinates, no identifiers, no follow-up. The signal was logged by British Field Station 17 near Bletchley Park and marked for urgent review, but the war was collapsing faster than anyone could analyze it. Days later, Allied forces began sweeping through Germany, uncovering one hidden facility after another. 2 testing sites, rocket factories, chemical labs, but the Harz Mountains remained strangely silent. When American patrols finally advanced toward the region, the maps stopped matching reality. Roads were blocked, bridges gone, and locals whispered that the mountains themselves had begun to groan. One farmer claimed to see blue light glowing between cracks in the stone, days before the explosions began. Another swore he felt the ground hum beneath his feet at night, like machinery still running deep underground. Then, sometime before dawn on May 1st, a shock wave rolled through the valley. Witnesses described a low thunder, followed by a column of dust and flame rising from the forest. When Allied units reached the coordinates tied to the intercepted message, they found what looked less like a battlefield and more like the aftermath of an execution. Tunnels collapsed, entrances blasted shut with military precision, and entire sections of the mountain face reduced to rubble. Inside one uncovered shaft, a soldier discovered a twisted steel plate stamped with 2 letters, V13. Nearby, a melted tag bore Heinemann's initials, KH, but the rest was unreadable. The site was declared contaminated and sealed off. In the intelligence summary that followed, one note stood out: possible intentional self-destruction to prevent capture. Phase Dreh suggests subsurface relocation or evacuation. What descent meant, no one could explain. Some said Heinemann destroyed everything to erase his legacy. Others believed he had taken it, and himself, somewhere far below the surface. By the time occupation forces secured the Harz sector, there was nothing left but ash, twisted metal, and silence. The coordinates of Heinemann's laboratory no longer matched anything visible on the ground. Where once stood a fortress of reinforced concrete and tunnel networks stretching for miles, there was now a jagged crater rimmed with scorched trees. The air smelled of ozone and burnt oil. Allied engineers called it an implosion site, the kind used to collapse underground structures inward rather than destroy them outward. But this implosion was too perfect, too clean. It was as if someone had planned it months in advance. In the nearby town of Elbengerode, villagers whispered about what they'd seen in the nights before the explosion, columns of trucks moving under blackout, soldiers loading heavy crates marked only with V13. Some said they heard engines deep beneath the earth that didn't sound like any vehicle they knew. A low, pulsing vibration that rattled windows and frightened animals. One miner claimed he saw smoke rising from a ventilation shaft miles away from the blast site, suggesting the tunnels ran far deeper than official maps ever showed. When investigators tried to trace Heinemann's name through captured Nazi archives, they found his personnel file removed, his correspondence missing, his payroll signature erased from ledgers as if he had never existed. Even his birth records from Dresden had vanished under mysterious fire damage. American intelligence listed him as presumed deceased, though nobody was ever found. Years later, a retired officer who'd been part of the investigation admitted something that still unsettled him. He said that while combing through debris at the site, his men found a melted reel of magnetic tape sealed in a metal canister. The label, scorched but legible, bore only 2 words: Lichtfalke, Whiter Unten. Translation: Light Falcon. Further below, whatever Heinemann had built, whatever Phase Dry had meant, it hadn't ended in that explosion. It had gone deeper beneath the earth, beneath history buried, where no one was ever meant to find it. When the guns fell silent in 1945, a new kind of war began. One fought in laboratories and filing cabinets. Allied intelligence teams raced to collect the spoils of German science before the Soviets could. The operation was called Paperclip, and it would shape the future of modern technology, from rockets to nuclear research. Names like von Braun and Dornberger made the headlines, but another name was quietly requested by multiple agencies: Dr. Klaus Heinemann. His file, however, was nowhere to be found. The British archives at Farm Hall had no trace of him. The U.S. Army's Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee listed his name as pending retrieval, then later stamped it missing. The Soviets, too, seemed to be searching. In 1947, a memo from their NKVD Science Division noted, Engineer H, last seen near Ilsenburg, possibly evacuated via subterranean passage, but the Americans had their own suspicions. One CIA analyst, then working under the OSS, scribbled a note in the margin of a report that would later vanish into classification. Subject possibly defected east or disappeared into the mountains. It was the only handwritten line on the page. Over the next 2 decades, rumors of Heinemann's survival circulated quietly among intelligence circles. A 1951 debriefing of a captured German technician mentioned the man who built the light engines and claimed he'd been taken by men who spoke Russian but didn't wear uniforms. Another report from 1958, classified top secret until the 1992nd, referenced a German propulsion engineer living in a Soviet research city beyond the Urals. No name given. No confirmation. Just another ghost in the archives. But something didn't add up. If Heinemann had defected, why were both sides still looking for his work? American analysts combed through seized Nazi patents and microfilm reels, finding schematic fragments labeled Project V13. None complete. One particular sketch faded, almost erased, depicted a conical chamber surrounded by magnetic coils. The annotation underneath simply read, Lichtfalke Energy Core. By 1960, even the CIA stopped searching. The official conclusion: presumed dead records destroyed during evacuation. Yet in a private memo sent to Washington that same year, an agent added one more line: unverified, speculative, but haunting. Locals insist the tunnels were never empty. They still hum. Time turned the war's ruins into overgrown scars, but the Harz Mountains never forgot. In the decades that followed, hikers and cavers began whispering about the valley near Elbingerode, the place where Heinemann's lab once stood. They spoke of nights when the forest seemed to breathe, when a faint vibration rolled through the soil like distant thunder. At first, locals dismissed it as mining activity or the shifting of old tunnels. But there were no mines left, only sealed shafts and warning signs. In 1967, a group of university geology students exploring a collapsed ventilation tunnel reported hearing a steady mechanical pulse, rhythmic and metallic, emanating from deep below. Their instruments registered magnetic interference strong enough to disrupt compasses and tape recorders. The report was quietly archived, never published. Others followed. Campers found fragments of metal, unlike anything they'd ever seen. Smooth, mirror gray, impossibly light. When one piece was tested decades later by a metallurgy lab in Göttingen, it defied classification. The alloy contained ratios of titanium and an unknown crystalline element, not matching any World War II-era production method. The lab's director called it decades ahead of its time. In 1974, a retired forest ranger claimed he saw a bluish light flicker from a sinkhole near the old blast crater, lasting just seconds before fading back into darkness. Two hikers who camped nearby that same summer described a hum rising from the ground around midnight low. Constant. Like an engine idling somewhere beneath their feet. Some said it was nothing more than wind trapped in tunnels. Others swore it was the echo of Heinemann's machines. Still alive after all these years, running without human hands. By the 1,980 seconds, the HARS had become a magnet for conspiracy hunters and amateur scientists. Some brought magnetometers, others brought tape recorders. Most left with nothing but eerie stories and a deep unease. Yet one thing was undeniable. Something under those mountains still moved, still hummed, as if the war's most secret project had never truly ended. And those who listened long enough claimed they could almost hear a pattern. 3 pulses, a pause, then 3 again, as if somewhere below, a machine was still waiting for its next command. In 2019, a researcher in Warsaw sifting through digitized Cold War files stumbled upon a folder mislabeled as Agricultural Reports, 1,953. Inside wasn't farming data. It was a collection of Soviet field intelligence documents stamped Soversheno, Secretno, Top Secret. Among them, one report stood out. It was titled Operation Schwarze Glock, the Black Bell. The translation was crude, but the contents were chilling. It described a joint Soviet-East German expedition into a sealed tunnel system within the Harz Mountains, where operatives had allegedly recovered metallic fragments of unknown composition. The report's closing line read simply, "Origin unknown. Radiation signatures irregular. Specimen transferred to Kishtim facility for containment." Attached to the file was a photograph of a man wearing round spectacles and a military-style engineer's coat. The caption, faint but legible, Dr. Klaus Heinemann, 1944. For 70 years, his name had been erased from official history, yet here it was, staring back in black and white. The coordinates listed beneath the photo were heavily redacted, but one could make out the first 3 digits. 51. 7 newtons. The same latitude as the Harz range. Another document in the same set, dated 1955, described recovered cylindrical core, possible propulsion chamber, and noted intermittent, low-frequency vibration detected at site. The Soviets believed the machine was part of a Nazi experiment known internally as Project Lichtfalke. What unsettled modern researchers most was the final note scribbled in red pencil on the last page. System may remain active. Do not attempt activation. When the archive leak went public, the files spread across the internet within hours, sparking renewed fascination with the Heinemann legend. Some dismissed them as Cold War disinformation. Others saw them as the first tangible proof that his technology had survived the war and possibly outlived him. Journalists and historians scrambled to locate the coordinates. But German authorities refused access to military zones in the region, citing unexploded ordnance risks. Yet those who examined the documents closely noticed a faint watermark stamped on the bottom corner of one page, a crest from the Soviet Ministry of Defense Laboratory No. 14. It was the same facility tied to nuclear propulsion experiments in the 1960 seconds. Whatever the Soviets found under the Harz, it wasn't just scrap metal. It was power. And for the first time in decades, the world was asking, what exactly did Klaus Heinemann build before he vanished? It began with curiosity and a stolen map. In the spring of 2021, two urban explorers, Lucas Meyer and Fabian Roth, set out to film a YouTube documentary about Cold War bunkers scattered across central Germany. They'd found an old East German survey map online, annotated with faded Soviet markings, and a series of dotted lines that ended abruptly near the village of Elbingerode, the same region tied to the Heinemann myth. One of those dotted lines led to a disused mine shaft sealed since the 1950 seconds. Locals called it Stolen 12. The entrance was half buried in debris, the air thick with damp earth and rust. Using rope and portable lights, the pair descended nearly 60 meters before reaching a solid steel wall where the tunnel dead-ended. But this wasn't part of the original mine. The steel was pristine, almost new, with laser-cut edges and welded seams so precise they could have been made yesterday. And there, in the center, was a door 3 meters tall, rivetless, with a circular handle embedded flush against its surface. No corrosion, no dust, just cold metal and silence. The explorers' cameras captured their disbelief. "This isn't from the 40 seconds," Lucas muttered on tape. "Someone's been down here." Fabian's flashlight swept across the frame, revealing something stranger still. A faint engraving near the upper corner letters, barely visible through grime. V13. They had no idea what it meant. But online viewers would later freeze-frame the footage and match it to old intelligence photos of Heinemann's lab equipment. The hinges of the door appeared laser-cut, and the alloy registered on their handheld magnetometer with readings far stronger than expected. Lucas tried knocking. The echo that came back wasn't hollow. It was dense, resonant, like metal pressed against vast empty space. Behind that sealed barrier was air and something else. Their battery lights flickered. The audio recorder caught a low hum, steady, mechanical, almost rhythmic. Then the file cut to static. The explorers resurfaced 3 hours later, pale, shaken, claiming their GPS had malfunctioned underground. Within days, their video vanished from the platform, taken down for security reasons. A week later, the entrance to Stolen 12 was welded shut by order of the Bundeswehr. No official statement was released. But those who saw the footage before it disappeared swore the last frame showed something impossible light seeping from the edges of the steel door, pulsing softly in the dark. When the door finally gave way, the sound was unlike any echo they'd ever heard. Thick, metallic, swallowed by the dark. Behind it stretched a corridor descending into the earth, lined with concrete walls and copper piping blackened by age. The air was stale, but breathable. The floor coated in dust, so thick that every footprint left a perfect outline. Lucas and Fabian moved cautiously, their lights cutting narrow cones through the gloom. What they found didn't resemble a mine. It looked like a laboratory preserved in amber. The first chamber was vast, supported by steel beams, with cables still hanging from rusted hooks. Rows of drafting tables stood in perfect formation, papers yellowed but intact. Machine tools rested mid-motion, as if their operators had stepped away only moments earlier. On one workbench sat a porcelain coffee cup, its rim stained dark, still balanced on its saucer. Nearby, a chair was tipped onto its side. Everything felt frozen. Waiting, Fabian whispered. It's like they vanished mid-breath. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Power conduits snaked along the ceiling toward a sealed glass partition, behind which sat a large generator marked AEG 1944. Beside it, shelves stacked with journals, schematics, and measuring instruments lined the walls. The explorers' flashlights flickered, then steadied again. The temperature dropped noticeably. The further they descended, the air heavy with iron and dust. A calendar pinned to the far wall bore one red-circled date, April 1945. The month Heinemann disappeared. In a locker room they found coats still hanging, leather gloves stiff with age, and a blackboard filled with equations and notes in German shorthand. A chalk drawing in the corner depicted what looked like a conical craft surrounded by magnetic field lines. Lichtwolke, Fabian whispered, pointing at the name written beneath it. Then the hum returned low, steady, almost like a heartbeat reverberating through the steel floor. Lucas pressed a hand against the wall and swore he could feel it vibrating. The sound wasn't coming from their equipment. It was coming from somewhere deeper, beneath the workshop itself. When they reached the final chamber, their flashlight swept across a sealed metal hatch recessed into the ground. Stenciled on its surface, in faded black paint, were two words: Schutzkammer, Zwei, shelter, 2. But before they could open it, Lucas noticed something on the nearby desk, papers stacked neatly under a glass weight, untouched by time. Each was marked with the same symbol they'd seen before. V13. The papers weren't random notes, they were complete engineering schematics. Precision drawings done in Heinemann's meticulous hand, labeled Project Lichtwolke. The diagrams showed a propulsion unit unlike anything from the 1942. A circular platform surrounded by magnetic coils, a central chamber marked Kernmodul, and beneath it, an array of copper conduits forming what appeared to be an energy field. Margins were filled with handwritten formulas describing rotational magnetic flux and gravity modulation concepts that wouldn't enter mainstream physics for decades. Lucas filmed each page, while Fabian carefully turned them over, revealing layer upon layer of blueprints, each more complex than the last. One sheet bore a bold stamp: Geheime Reichssache. Nur for Dr. K. Heinemann. Top secret. For Dr. K. Heinemann only. In the corner was a sketch of a small aircraft, like Kraft. Its hull annotated with measurements labeled Antimagnetische Hull, anti-magnetic shell. Another drawing depicted a spherical core with a note reading Energy Quell. Flüssig Metall in rotation. Liquid metal in rotation. Lucas muttered, "This looks like plasma containment." Fabian laughed nervously. In 1945, they both knew what they were looking at shouldn't exist. Later, when a copy of the footage was leaked to a group of independent engineers online, their assessment was unanimous and unsettling. If authentic, these designs predict magnetogravitic principles not replicated until the 1980 seconds. One physicist wrote, "Whoever drew this was working with theories 20, maybe 30 years ahead of their time," but perhaps most disturbing was the final page titled Phase Dreh, Abstieg. It showed the facility itself, cross-sectioned, a main workshop, a central generator, and below them, a deeper chamber accessible through the hatch, labeled Schutzkammer Zwei. The lower section was marked with a single note, written in red ink: Nicht öffnen bis Aktivierung abgeschlossen. Do not open until activation complete. Lucas looked up from the papers toward the hatch in the floor, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Heinemann never left, he said quietly. He went down. Fabian started to respond, but the lights flickered again, this time in sequence, as if triggered by motion. Somewhere in the depths below, the hum grew louder. Behind the final row of drafting tables, half hidden by fallen beams and debris, Lucas noticed a narrow passage, sealed off by a sheet of corrugated steel. It looked makeshift, improvised, nothing like the precision-built chambers around it. When they pried it open, cold air spilled out, stale and metallic. Their flashlights revealed a small rail line, narrow gauge, descending into the earth at a steep angle. The tracks were old but intact, vanishing into darkness where the tunnel had collapsed decades ago. Someone had tried to seal it deliberately. The rockfall was too even, too symmetrical. Above the collapse, scrawled in faded chalk across the concrete wall, were the words, Weiter unten, Schutzkammer 2. Further below, Shelter 2. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, and beside it, a handprint smeared in rust-colored dust. Lucas crouched beside the rail, brushing away dirt to reveal faint wheel marks, small, as if made by carts, not trains. They went down, he whispered. Not out. Fabian shone his light on a broken lantern lying near the tracks, its glass uncracked but covered in soot. Next to it lay a tattered leather notebook, its pages half melted from moisture. Inside were numbers, dates, temperatures, and a final line written in English, oddly out of place among the German notes. We descend at dawn. The light calls below. The entry was dated April 27th, 1945, one day before Heinemann's last transmission. Nearby, the wall bore marks that looked like clawing, deep scratches trailing down the concrete. Whether they were made by tools or desperate hands, neither man wanted to guess. The deeper they explored, the more the air seemed to vibrate, a low, constant resonance that seemed to pulse through the rock itself. The sound was coming from beneath the collapse, faint but rhythmic, like machinery idling somewhere far below. Lucas raised his camera, zooming in on the chalk words once more. Shelter 2, he murmured. That's where they went. Fabian turned to leave, but froze. The hum changed pitch higher, almost responsive, like it knew they were there. For a brief moment, the dust on the floor trembled. Then silence. Whatever had been sleeping beneath the workshop had stirred just long enough to remind them that Heinemann's story didn't end in 1945. It continued downward, into darkness, beyond where the world had stopped looking. Among the relics scattered throughout the workshop, one object stood apart, a sealed cylindrical core, about the size of a human torso, bolted to a reinforced base and wrapped in copper wiring that trailed into shattered conduits along the wall. Thick glass tubing coiled around it like veins, each filled with a dark, viscous fluid that shimmered faintly under the explorer's lights. It wasn't part of any known generator from the 1940 seconds. The casing bore the same stamp found on the blueprints. V13. Lucas brushed away dust to reveal a small brass plate inscribed with the words, Energy Quell, Versuch 3. Energy Source Test 3. The thing looked inert, dead. But when Fabian held a Geiger counter close, the device began to tick slowly at first, then faster. Radiation readings spiked, then stabilized, hovering at levels no natural background source could explain. Yet it wasn't leaking danger, it was contained, precise, almost deliberate. Lucas noted something stranger still. The copper wires weren't corroded. They shone like new metal, untouched by time. It was as if the core had been generating a weak current all these years, preserving itself. It's still running, Fabian whispered, backing away. They followed the wiring to a control console half buried in dust. Dials frozen, gauges shattered. One label still legible. Magnetischer Fluss, Stabilisierung, magnetic flow stabilization. Whatever this thing powered, it wasn't conventional electricity, it was something meant to manipulate fields, not fuel engines. Lucas recorded every angle, his voice low, almost reverent. If this is real, it's decades ahead of its time. Later, when independent physicists reviewed the footage, they were stunned. The device resembled a self-sustaining plasma generator, primitive, but theoretically possible. One expert wrote, "It's like a hybrid between a reactor and a capacitor. An energy core designed for continuous rotation." Another simply said, "If this thing still functions, it shouldn't." Yet what puzzled everyone most was the faint vibration picked up by the camera microphone. A hum, steady, layered, pulsing every 7 seconds. As if somewhere within that sealed core, something was still alive, still turning. Whatever powered Lichtfalke had survived the fall of the Reich, the silence of decades, and the weight of the earth above it. And if Heinemann had indeed descended into Schutzkammer 2, he hadn't gone alone. He'd taken his creation with him, and perhaps, in some impossible way, it had never stopped running. The video lasted less than 12 minutes before it was taken down. Uploaded in the early hours of a rainy Sunday morning, it had already gathered 200,000 views before vanishing from every major platform. Within hours, the explorers' accounts were suspended, their contact numbers disconnected. Those who managed to download the clip before it disappeared described a scene that felt like something out of a Cold War fever dream. An underground facility frozen in time, its walls stamped with the Mark V13. The footage ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as the camera microphone picked up a low hum and the sound of metal shifting. By dawn the next day, the German Federal Police had sealed off the entire region, citing environmental hazards and unstable terrain. Roadblocks appeared on every forest trail leading into the Harz foothills. Helicopters circled the area that night. No insignia, no lights. Locals living near Elbinger Road said they were told to stay indoors due to possible chemical contamination. But the following evening, witnesses saw something stranger. Unmarked military trucks, black, windowless, moved up the mountain in convoy. They carried floodlights, heavy machinery, and wooden crates loaded by men in unmarked uniforms. No one spoke. By dawn, they were gone. The shaft the explorers had entered, known locally as Stollen 12, was filled with concrete and welded steel plates. The hillside was regraded. Trees replanted within days. Satellite images of the area from before and after the event showed a single discrepancy. An infrared heat bloom recorded at 3:12 a.m., lasting less than 30 seconds. Authorities blamed construction activity, but a retired Bundeswehr geologist later claimed he was asked to analyze soil samples from the site and was told not to file a report. He described the samples as electrically active, faintly magnetized even at rest. When journalists pressed local officials for comment, the response was curt. There is nothing of historical significance in the Harz. The area remains closed for safety reasons. And yet, days later, a hiker wandering near the fence line reported hearing that same low vibration beneath the ground, a hum that pulsed through the soil like the faint heartbeat of a machine that refused to die. When silence falls, speculation takes its place. Once word of the Harz discovery leaked, theories erupted across the internet, in academic circles, and even within defense departments quietly monitoring the chatter. Was this truly Heinemann's lost workshop or something built decades later, a reconstruction by Cold War scientists testing ideas born from his blueprints? Some pointed to the precision of the steel door and laser-cut hinges as proof of post-war engineering. Others argued that the untouched tools, dated calendars, and authentic 1000 940 seconds equipment inside the chamber could only mean one thing. Time had simply stopped underground. The debate deepened when metallurgical experts examined leaked photos of the recovered fragments. The alloy, labeled V13 composite, contained isotopic ratios never before recorded, microscopic structures that resisted corrosion, heat, even cutting tools. Aerospace insiders whispered that samples matching its signature had been quietly tested at facilities in California, Nevada, and Bavaria. Publicly, no one admitted it existed. Privately, several engineers confirmed under anonymity that the material behaves like it's partially diamagnetic under high rotation. In plain words, it tried to lift itself. If true, that meant Lichtfalke was more than myth. It was a working prototype of magneto-gravitic propulsion, decades before the rest of the world caught up. As for Heinemann himself, the theories multiplied. Some believed he and his team died when the tunnels collapsed, sealing their work forever. Others were certain he'd escaped using the technology he created, vanishing into the very earth that had concealed him. A fringe group even suggested Schutzkammer 2 wasn't a shelter at all, but a gateway, a chamber designed to test field displacement, perhaps even transport. One physicist studying the blueprints said quietly, "Heinemann wasn't trying to build a weapon, he was trying to leave." Whether he succeeded or not, no one knows. But the more the world learns, the clearer one truth becomes. History may have buried the man, yet his machines, the hum, the light, the alloy that defies time still whisper beneath the mountains, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to wake them again. The workshop beneath the Harz Mountains is silent now, or at least, that's what the official story says. Concrete seals the entrances, fences ring the forest, and satellite images show nothing but untouched soil and trees. Yet for those who have seen the footage, for those who have heard the hum that lingers beneath the ground, silence no longer feels like truth. What lies buried there is more than a relic of war. It's a time capsule of ambition, fear, and genius, unbound. In that sealed chamber, surrounded by dust and shadow, sits the work of a man who reached beyond the limits of his era and paid the price for it. Dr. Klaus Heinemann wasn't the first mind to disappear into history's margins. But few have left behind a mystery so complete. His machines, his formulas, his impossible designs, they all point to a mind that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Some call him a visionary, others a madman. Perhaps he was both. The truth is that men like Heinemann live in the narrow space between brilliance and oblivion. In a world consumed by conflict, he sought to create something that defied gravity itself. Something that could transcend the weight of war and the pull of the earth. Whether he succeeded, no one can say. Maybe he died beneath those tunnels, consumed by his own creation. Maybe he escaped, slipping into the deep silence of the mountains he once called his laboratory. Or maybe his machines are still running somewhere in the dark, humming to a rhythm only he understood. His disappearance reminds us that history's darkest moments often conceal its most extraordinary minds and its most dangerous ideas. What began as the pursuit of invention became a mirror reflecting humanity's endless hunger for control over nature, over time, over death itself. The blueprints of Project Lichtfalke may have been born from war, but they carry something far older. The timeless human desire to rise above the earth and touch the unknown. And perhaps that's why the Harz Mountains still whisper at night. Why hikers still claim to feel vibrations beneath their feet. Maybe it isn't the wind or shifting stone they hear. Maybe it's the echo of a machine that was never meant to stop, a reminder that some discoveries, once unearthed, can never truly be buried again. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.